Open Minds Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs. They're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come film this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
Ooh, what is up, guys, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that calls myself Shane Squatch.
So you're not doing the Alex Jones voice this week?
No, I was trying to keep it a little bit more tame because there's a little bit more of a tame episode this week. We might get unhinged knowing us at some point, but I was trying to tame it down a little bit this week because I want people to take this seriously.
I was going to say, you're being pretty understated this week. But anyway, I'm the big bad boo daddy, Orin Felix.
I mean, you could have still done yours as a wrestler announcer voice. I mean, how do you just say the big bad boo daddy without being like, the big bad boo daddy, Orin Felix?
Well, you're like kind of the ring announcer, so you didn't do your thing. So,
well, I need to get a button for like applauding wrestling audience, because they're a different type of people. They shout differently.
Yeah, we need to have like the boos in the background.
Yep. And the chants and just a little bit of background music that you can barely hear.
Some pyrotechnics. Speaking of pyrotechnics, I think we have some news and updates.
So first piece of news and updates, well, probably only piece of news and updates. I don't know why I always say that, just out of default. But anyways, I'm still promoting, of course, all of the new stuff that I recently dropped on the merch store. I want to make sure that I promote all of this stuff well enough, because I feel like in the past I never talk about, I like drop a shirt design and then I pretend like it never happened. But I ended up cleaning up the merch store like I mentioned last week. Added 4 new designs to it. I have some new designs that I'm working on, trying to focus on making more of a clothing brand name, I guess, for Open Minds Media, where it's not just podcast logos. There's only a handful of those on there, of course, but I'm putting my focus into, cryptids, paranormal, extraterrestrial, conspiratorial type designs and everything. Like conspiratorial wise, of course, I have a new shirt that says Reptilians for America, and it's like a blue shirt with red, white, and blue, looks super patriotic, and it has a lizard wearing like a politician suit and stuff. And then I got a pretty cool Dogman design that people say they like. And then I got another one with a super buff Sasquatch that says respect the forest. So a lot of new stuff coming that way. Just make sure you guys keep your eyes peeled over there. And there is a direct link to the merch store down in the show description. And you guys can use code Cryptid10 to receive 10% off still.
And if you guys want to keep up with Bizarre Encounters and the whole Open Minds Media family, you can find us on social media. Instagram's where we're most active, but we've also got the Discord, we got the TikTok, we got the YouTube, we got all sorts of things. We're easy to find. Just get up with us somehow.
And if anybody specifically wants to report an encounter, you guys can do that to ommencounterreports at outlook.com, or you guys can, of course, just message me on social media, or you guys can also use the submission form that's on the link tree. Whatever's easier for you guys. I just really want to be able to hear those encounters. You guys can either, 1, type them out, or 2, you guys can record yourself telling the story, and then you guys can send that to me. And depending on what you want to do with it, I'd love to be able to use them for the show. But if you guys just want somebody to talk about this stuff with, just let me know, and I'd be more than happy to not tell anybody the story again. But of course, just let me know what you're interested in doing with your story when you guys report those encounters to ommencounterreports at outlook.com.
And coming back very soon, we're going to have Bizarre Inquiries, our most of the time Patreon exclusive mini show. So you guys, you can submit questions. You can submit some kind of like video that you want us to watch and talk about. Just anything you guys want us to talk about, submit it, and we will inquire about it.
Actually, speaking of that, we will be recording one after this episode. Well, chronologically to us, but it'll be dropping tomorrow, the next day after this episode comes out, doing some of the new formats. We're going to be covering an interesting article, having some talk back and forth on it. But again, when you guys submit those questions, you guys could even submit interesting articles you guys want us to talk about, or some video clips, whatever you guys are interested in hearing us talk about, send them on over. And if anybody is interested in supporting the show, of course, I already mentioned the Open Minds Media merch store. Absolute great way to support the show. You guys can also leave reviews or ratings for the show on iTunes or Spotify if you guys enjoy listening to us every week. You know, if you don't mind taking that extra like 20, 30 seconds to type out something nice for us, we'd really, really appreciate it. And of course, it'll help out to bump up the show in the algorithm, to have make it so more people will come on the show, share their ideas and everything, and we can keep spreading out the community and having more like-minded individuals all interacting with each other. And past that, you guys can go and join the Open Minds Media Patreon, where you'll get this show, Inquiries of All Reality, basically anything Open Minds Media besides Midwest Mythos, because Riley's doing his own thing with Patreon, of course. But over there, I have a $1 tier, a $3 tier, and a $5 tier. All of them, of course, get different benefits. 7-day free trial is available for all of them. So definitely go and check them out. And if you guys are planning on scooping some merch, each of those comes with a specific promo code. So make sure if you guys are Patreon subscribers already, or if you guys are becoming Patreon subscribers, to look out for that special promo code for the OMM merch store.
And all this shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show descriptions. So, Mr. Jones, tonight we've got something a little different for our listeners. Why don't you go ahead and jump in and tell them about what you've prepared for tonight's episode?
So, originally, like we kind of talked about, and we may have mentioned it last week, we're originally going to cover Betty and Barney Hill, but like Orin always says, like, there's certain topics where everything has already been said that can be said about it. So, what's the point of even covering the same thing everybody else has covered? So, obviously, you guys hear me throw a lot of off-the-wall ideas sometimes on the show, and I feel like I don't do enough backing for those. So at least for this one, and this could also lead into a lot of future episodes, I want to start doing some of these episodes where we kind of connect some of the theories so that you guys understand where I'm coming from with them. And one of the main ones that I've been talking about recently is this whole idea that I'm already going to throw a disclaimer on this one, saying that I do not think that all of the UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon is human related, but I definitely think that there is a portion of it that is human related. And at least with today's, what I've brought to the table, trying to connect everything, I think that this could describe how all of this is happening, why there is a human aspect to it. And at least for all of this stuff, I'm going to try to keep it as rationally based as possible, but it's going to be very conspiratorial. There's going to be some stuff that we just have to skirt the edges of, because I don't want to offend nobody while trying to explain these ideas and everything. But some of these components to this could lead into future episodes. But as far as right now, it's kind of like an outline to be able to jump through some ideas and kind of explain why I believe this is a possibility. So before I hop into it, Orin, do you have any ideas or anything you want to throw onto it?
No, I'm going to just kind of let you start, and then I'll just jump in whenever I want to, if that's all right.
All right, perfect. So kind of trying to put this in somewhat of a timeline here. Obviously, you guys have heard me talk about the whole idea about how I think that when people are abducted, they seem like they're under something, like they're under the influence of some type of like psychedelic, for example. So kind of bringing it back to the beginning of where I think all of this stuff could potentially have started, you of course have to go back to the original discovery of LSD itself. So to give a little bit of back information on that, Albert Hofmann was the man who discovered LSD. He was born in Switzerland. He joined the pharmaceutical chemical department of Sandor Laboratories, located in Basel, as a co-worker with Professor Arthur Stoll. Founder and director of the pharmaceutical department, he began studying the medical plant squill and the fungus ergot as part of a program to purify and synthesize active constituents for use as pharmaceuticals. His main contribution was to elucidate the chemical structure of the common nucleus of glycosius, an active participant of Mediterranean squill. While researching, Hofmann first synthesized LSD on November 16th, 1938. So keep in mind that date, 1938. The main institution of the synthesis was to obtain a respiratory and circulatory stimulant. It was set aside for 5 years until April 16th, 1943. Keep that date in mind. when Hoffman decided to take a second look at it. While re-synthesizing LSD, he accidentally absorbed a small amount of the drug and discovered its powerful effects. He describes what he felt as being affected by a remarkable restlessness combined with a slight dizziness. At home, I lay down and sank into a not unpleasant intoxicant-like condition, characterized by an extremely stimulated imagination, in a dreamlike state. With eyes closed, I found the daylight to be unpleasantly glaring. I perceived an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes, with intense kaleidoscope play of colors. After about 2 hours, this condition faded away. So keep in mind what he said about the whole dreamlike state for anybody that isn't familiar with LSD, never done LSD, anything like that. And the fact that it was 1943, which is close to, well, not close, but in the middle of when World War II was happening, that it became a thing that people were actually active and knew about. But he did discover it in 1938 and then resynthesized it, which means that there could have been already something that was synthesized that he originally created that somebody else could have gotten their hands on already by then. So kind of jumping back just a little bit, and this is where it's going to get slightly conspiratorial, but you'll kind of see as everything kind of goes a little bit farther in. In 1936, a UFO allegedly crashed in the Black Forest near Freisberg, Germany, where Hitler's SS quickly removed it for research. So the whole UFO crash that supposedly happened in Germany led to a lot of the advanced technology that people were claiming to see at the time. One of which may be a complete conspiracy, but who knows? The Die Glocken, aka the Nazi bell, which was supposedly a zero gravity device that could have potentially also had time traveling abilities. And some people have connected this actually with possibly the Kecksburg UFO incident because it had the same shape. And from what the Nazis described of this thing, it supposedly had a bunch of hieroglyphics and everything that were put on the side of it. So did the Kecksburg UFO. And on top of that, there was also supposed sightings where people claimed that they saw two people that looked like Nazi officers walk out of the Kecksburg UFO. And the Die Glocken supposedly disappeared with two Nazi officers. So just another possible weird connection that they could have had some type of definite zero gravity type devices, all stemming from this possible UFO crash from 1936.
And kind of taking it a step further, when you consider all the Nordic type extraterrestrial encounters, I think that's kind of a fun aspect. I mean, if they're time traveling and going through wormholes and whatnot, maybe a lot of these Nordic extraterrestrials that people see are actually time traveling Nazis.
And see, this, you're already kind of jumping ahead a little bit because I'll get into that a little bit because that's going to side skirt something that we kind of have to watch how we talk about. But yes, that is definitely part of this theory. So obviously World War II started September 1st, 1939, and it ended September 2nd, 1945. So keep in mind, right before that was when this UFO crash happens. They already supposedly had this technology going into World War II. And then the whole thing with LSD was technically discovered a year before World War II started. And then it was resynthesized, but again, could have had somebody's hands on it before then in 1943, which still would have been in the middle of World War II, because that would have been 2 years before World War II ended. So it could have definitely been used during Nazi experimentation. But keep in mind, and I had to put this as a special part of the notes, the Nazis did not occupy Switzerland, and this doctor was from Switzerland. But again, Europe's kind of close-knit, scientific things kind of get passed around here and there, so still in the same area. Otherwise, it would have been maybe an even more direct link if they would have occupied Switzerland, but I still definitely think that it was still getting passed around within the academic community. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, all this stuff was going on the same time period in the same general geographic area. So, I mean, there's a little bit of smoke there, if nothing else.
And again, if they know that something has this quality, what not a perfect thing to use in order to kind of put people in a different mind state in order to do different things to them.
Mm-hmm.
On top of the fact that everybody already knows that the Nazis were everywhere trying to collect every weird artifact they possibly could, and they're very into the occult. So everybody knows how much of a cult following, mind the pun, LSD has, on top of the whole spiritual connection, possibly seeing other realms, all that kind of connotation that gets thrown behind LSD anyways. So going into the Nazi human experiments And I'm going to kind of brush over some of this, skip past some ideas, but there were a couple of particular things that they were doing that definitely caught my interest that I kind of give a little bit more of an explanation on. But Nazi human experimentation was a series of medical experiments on prisoners by Nazi Germany in its concentration camps, mainly between 1942 and 1945. There were 15,754 documented victims of various nationalities and age groups. And that's documented, which means that there could have been significantly more, especially if they were doing even weirder off-the-wall things that were, they didn't even want the other Nazis to know about, like some deep underground stuff that they were working on, which I guarantee you was happening. Although the true number is believed to be way more extensive, like I was mentioning, many survived, with a quarter of documented victims being killed. Survivors generally experienced severe permanent injury. At Auschwitz and other camps, under the direction of Eduard Wirths, selected inmates were subjected to various experiments that were designed to help German military personnel in combat situations develop new weapons, aid in the recovery of military personnel who had been injured, and to advance Nazi racial ideas and eugenics. And eugenics, I'll give a little bit more detail on that as we get a little bit farther in, including the twin experiments, of course, that everybody's familiar with. After the war, these crimes were tried at what became known as the doctor's trials, and revolts at the abuse perpetrated led to the development of the Nuremberg Code of Medical Ethics. The Nazi physicians in the doctor's trial argued that military necessity justified their experiments and compared their victims to collateral damage from Allied bombings. And keep in mind here, this is going to be another thing that plays in. The Nuremberg Code of Medical Ethics obviously made it so that you couldn't do these kind of weird experiments where the general public would know about it or be able to have any tie or link back to you, because that also is going to play back in a little bit later on. So kind of giving a little bit more background for eugenics. I'm going to try to leave this really brief and people can kind of get the ideas behind this, but eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population. Historically, eugenists have altered various human gene frequencies by inhibiting the fertility of people and groups purported to be inferior or promoting that of those proposed to be superior. So, of course, everybody is going to link that with the whole Nazi idea of the blonde hair, blue eyes. But obviously, this idea goes back way farther. And one example that actually caught the Nazis' interest, supposedly, and that was the reason why Hitler started diving into eugenics, as messed up as this sounds, was from the United States. Because the United States were getting into eugenics way before that. And the earliest time where I could find documented that the U.S. was conducting eugenics was essentially with the slaves. Again, this is the part where we kind of got a side skirt a little bit, but essentially what they were trying to do, obviously, when the slave trade was happening, was that they were trying to take, this is the best slave, this is my strongest one, this is my strongest female, I'm going to make these two have a baby so that there's an even stronger child. So they're already selectively breeding people during the slave trade. Obviously, this happened way before with animals and stuff, but this is one of the first documented times I've seen it actually happening on a grand scale with people. So, inspired by U.S. backing, which again will also kind of play back into this a little bit. Before I get into the experiments, do you have any comments or anything like that? Because I keep running through here and I don't know where to stop for letting you make comments.
No, you're good. I'm kind of just going to let you roll. The only thing I'll add to the whole eugenics thing, and if you touch on this more later, stop me, since, this episode's kind of a different format than we normally go over. I haven't read through all your notes, but this idea of basically that's at the heart of eugenics, I think has a lot of connections to stuff we talk about in the more conspiratorial realms, as far as manifest destiny, and then the European elites trying to keep their bloodlines pure, and it even goes back to Nephilim type stuff. So I think this idea kind of contributes and touches on a lot of things that we talk about, and it goes way deeper than just, hey, this was some experiments that the Nazis were doing.
And I don't think that they stopped, and this is where I'm kind of leading my ideas into here. But just an example of some of the experiments they're conducting, and then I'll get into the ones that were specific points of interest for me, besides the eugenics part, of course. Blood coagulation experiments experiments on twins, which we talked about a little bit earlier, experiments on homosexuals, which, not to get too controversial with this, could also play into something that we're doing in plain sight now, which could be a continuation on Nazi experiments, but we're not going to get too heavily into that. But I'm just saying that it's definitely possible that these experiments are still happening right in front of our face, but people are hiding it under another idea, but they are still able to conduct these experiments. Freezing experiments, trying to see, how cold people would be able to survive in. High altitude experiments, which was trying to see how high up in the stratosphere and stuff they could actually get people where they'd still be able to breathe and everything. So again, that could possibly somewhat play into all of this UFO stuff. Seawater experiments. And this is where I get into the ones I want to give more detail. Sterilization and fertility experiments, which obviously kind of leads in with the eugenics idea. From about March 1941 to about January 1945, sterilization experiments were conducted at Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and other places. The purpose of these experiments was to develop a method of sterilization that would be suitable for sterilizing millions of people with a minimum of time and effort. The targets for sterilization included the Jewish people and the Roma populations. These experiments were conducted by the means of X-ray, surgical, and various drugs, which X-ray seems to play in with a lot of the weird frequency light stuff that also gets conducted with a lot of the UFO stuff. And of course, the drugs, talking about LSD, because it doesn't necessarily state which drugs. I think LSD could have played a component in some of this stuff too. Thousands of victims were sterilized. Sterilization was not limited to these experiments, with the Nazi government already sterilizing 400,000 people as part of its compulsory sterilization program. One prominent scientist in this domain was Karl Claudberg, who initially x-rayed women to make sure that there was no obstruction to their ovaries. Over the next 3 to 5 sessions, he injected caustic substances into their uteruses without anesthetics. Many died, others suffered permanent injury and infections, and about 700 were successfully sterilized. And of course, everybody knows that there's the huge focus on reproductive organs when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, one of which seems to be the ovaries, of course. There's an interest in the eggs or whatever. So again, this is possibly something that's going to link in here. The women who stood against him and his experiments were deemed as unfit test subjects and were sent to the gas chambers. I guess I don't have to get too much farther into that aspect of it. But obviously they were running sterilization and fertility programs. Let's see. Is there another part?
Well, I got a thought that I can throw in while you're looking if you want me to.
Yeah, for sure.
So since we're kind of dipping our toes into more conspiratorial type things here recently, especially in this episode, and this is something I have not dug super deep into, so don't quote me on any of this, but have you heard all this shit going on with like fucking Bill Gates and Microsoft and like the birth control chip?
Yes.
Supposedly coming out?
Yep.
So like, this is one of those nothing new under the sun situations, if you ask me. I mean, we're just calling eugenics by a different name now. And okay, so you're going to put this chip in people and you can, turn it on and off with your phone. If you can do that, what can these motherfuckers do that are putting it into you? So, I mean, this is all like depopulation agenda type stuff going on here. And, they can, if they have that power, they can decide who gets to procreate and who doesn't. So, I mean, it's just taking eugenics a step further, and they're making people think this is a great idea.
I was going to say, they just put it under a new face. And the other part about it, too, is the fact of, like, they're trying to develop stuff like this. Of course, they have to do a lot of different testing. They claim that, we test in animals, we do this, we do that. But if you're trying to create something for people, and you had a means of being able to have an infinite amount of people to test on without them willingly knowing or anything that's happening and no tie back to you, it seems like a lot of these elites would take that opportunity to do that. But I guess, actually, because of what you brought up, I'll just read the rest of this because I think it will kind of play in a little bit to what you were saying too. Intravenous injections of solutions speculated to contain iodine and silver nitrate were similarly successful, but had unwanted side effects such as vaginal bleeding, severe abdominal pain, and cervical cancer. Those who receive a cancer were vivisected with their cervix and wombs removed. And again, what does that sound like?
That's just straight up alien abduction type stuff.
Exactly. And even the cancer
also,
aspect.
Yeah, going a step further, it also kind of ties into cattle mutilation type stuff. And, there's a big link between cattle mutilations and just straight up abductions. They're doing the same thing. It's just based on what group of livestock they're doing it to, humans or actual livestock.
And I do have something to throw in with that at the very end when we get into theories and everything. So that part will also come back up. Therefore, radiation treatment became the favored choice of sterilization. Specific amounts of exposure to radiation destroyed a person's ability to reproduce ova or sperm, sometimes administered through deception. Many suffered severe radiation burns. And again, what does that sound like?
Yeah.
The Nazis also implemented X-ray radiation treatments to their search for mass sterilization. They gave the women abdominal X-rays. Men received them on their genitals or on their genitalia for abnormal periods of time in an attempt to invoke infertility. After the experiment was complete, they surgically removed their reproductive organs without anesthesia for lab analysis. And again, talk about stuff that's getting played out right in front of people still. MD William E. Sheldman, a professor from the University of Toronto, in collaboration with Dr. Howard Israel of Columbia University, published a report on an investigation on the medical experiments performed in Austria under the Nazi regime. In that report, he mentioned a Dr. Hermann Stevia, who used the war to experiment on live humans. Stevia specifically focused on the reproductive system of women. He would tell women that their date of death in advance, and he would evaluate how their psychological distress would affect their menstrual cycles. After they were executed, he would dissect and examine the reproductive organs to investigate the hypothesis. Allegedly, some of the women were raped after they were told the date when they would be killed so that Steves could study the path of sperm through the reproductive system. However, this was been called into question as there is no evidence that Steve ever studied sperm migration, a subject not mentioned in his papers. So again, seems very reminiscent of things that supposedly happen to people on UFOs. And getting into the last part of the interesting experiments, bone, muscle, and nerve transplant experiments. From about September 1942 to about December 1943, experiments were conducted at the Ravensbrück concentration camp for the benefit of the German armed force to study bone, muscle, and nerve regeneration and body transplantation from one person to another. In these experiments, subjects had their bones, muscles, and nerves removed without anesthesia. As a result of these operations, many victims suffered intense agony, mutilation, and permanent disability. And again, what does this kind of sound like? Some of the stuff that people experience when they're on UFOs.
Yeah. I mean, even like the whole, not to get too crude, and I'm sure we're going to get there, but the whole like probing aspect, like, has a very kind of sexual assault type vibe to it. And a lot of these abductions take on a very sexual tone. So, I mean, it's all right there in front of you. You just got to kind of put the pieces together a little bit.
See, and this is how I felt when I started putting all these notes together, because I've stated that theory, but actually putting all these pieces together, like, it really started clicking after I had all these set dates and exact references to things.
Well, and I don't know if I mentioned this when we were doing our Mothman Prophecy series or not, but in that book, Keel says specifically how like the phenomenon seems to prey on younger women and seems to be like drawn to women during their menstrual cycles and whatnot. And that falls like right in line with this. If these are experiments, you know, being conducted under some sort of cover or mask or cloaking or whatever you want to fucking call it, that makes sense. And even with like people who say they experience like sleep paralysis and like incubus and succubus stories, I've heard a lot of times like once they age out of menstruating, these attacks seem to stop. So there's definitely some sort of like blood genetic material tie to a lot of the paranormal and a lot of the bizarre encounters that we talk about.
I mean, could there even potentially be a tie to that too, where if they were potentially using LSD in order to mess with people's perception, and then they were also mixing it with a paralytic, couldn't that be some type of a cocktail, which could be why, I'm not saying it explains all sleep paralysis, but at least some portion of sleep paralysis, if this stuff is potentially true about all these experiments, it definitely seems possible that they could have made some injectable that would give you that same feeling of dread. And I'm not saying LSD exactly, but maybe some derivative that only lasts a certain amount of time and then some type of paralytic.
Yeah, and going a step further, basically every time we talk about this type of stuff on the show, we mention how these experiences like run in family bloodlines. If they're studying genetics and trying to, harvest, for lack of a better term, certain genetic material and certain traits, that would make perfect sense why, these things follow these family ties and these family bloodlines.
Exactly. And actually, I'm going to make reference back to that again at the end when we get into the reasons why and everything, but that definitely also plays a huge tie in it too. So on April 12th, 1946, a survivor named Jadwiga Kaminska gave a deposition about her time at Ravensbrück concentration camp, describing how she was operated on twice. Both operations involved one of her legs, and although she never described herself as having any knowledge as to what exactly the procedure was, she explained that both times she was in extreme pain and developed a severe post-surgery, but was given little to no aftercare. Kaminska described being told that she was being operated on simply because she was a young girl and a Polish patriot. She described how her leg oozed pus for months after the operation. Prisoners were also experimented on by having their bone marrow injected with bacteria to study the effectiveness of new drugs being developed for use in the battlefields. Those who survived remained permanently disfigured. And then hopping into a little bit ahead, obviously World War II ends, and there's all these Nazi scientists that everybody still is interested in the work that they were doing, even if they don't want to publicly state that they were interested in the work they were doing. So that's when it comes in Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip was a secret United States intelligence program in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from former Nazi Germany to the U.S. For government employment after the end of World War II in Europe between 1945 and 1959. Not the end of the war, but when they were starting getting picked up was between 1945 and 1959. Most were former members and leaders of the Nazi Party. So now you're looking at Nazi scientists that are now employed by the U.S. government to do exactly what they were doing. The effort,
and that's not all there. I don't know if you're going to get into this, but they basically brought them over here to run our fucking space program too.
Yep.
I don't know if you get into Werner von Braun. Do you talk about any of that?
I don't think I bring it up in here, but I figured we'd kind of start making some of these ties as we got farther in, where the experimentation starts connecting in with the UFO phenomenon. But yes.
Yeah. So I'll just throw this out there for a quick little, just to dip our toes into it before we get too deep. But yeah, so Werner von Braun, basically the head of the Nazi rocketry program, just, rocket genius. He was one of these people who was brought over during Operation Paperclip, basically to work for NASA and run the U.S. space program. And it's wild. Like, this is easy to find. You guys can Google it. There's like a video that Walt Disney produced of Werner von Braun, like talking about the need to go to space and, how this was the next step in human evolution and all that kind of crap. So the fact that there were these known Nazis over here running all these institutions in America, and then you get in the ties with like Disney and everything, like this is all incestuous. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit in our Freemason episode, and not to get too political or anything, but the illusion that there's like different teams, going against each other. No, everybody's kind of fucking in bed together. It just depends on who can benefit the most from it.
It's all just a game. It's a giant facade to make you think that all this stuff's going on, but there's actually behind the scenes workings. Because this also connects into the Antarctic stuff, that the Nazis supposedly had multiple bases that were in the Arctic, and also kind of weird, the U.S. doesn't actually have its own base in the Arctic. We actually use other countries' bases and stuff. And again, you're not allowed to travel there without any type of government permission and stuff. Mm-hmm. So who knows what could potentially be there, or if any of the work that they were already doing there stopped and they just may have continued on the work that they were doing there. And that could also explain with the whole phenomenon on why so many UFOs are seen around that area are coming from the Antarctic.
And taking it a step further, and this is maybe jumping the shark a little bit, but we talked about, I can't remember what episode it was in, about how like a huge number of celebrities and powerful people have submarine licenses. So, I mean, that could play into it as well.
Yep. And how many celebrities have actually gotten to go to the Arctic, which is also kind of weird when you get into the Nugetics and the cloning idea.
Yeah.
But the effort began earliest in 1945 as the Allies advanced into Germany and discovered the wealth of scientific talent and advanced research that had contributed to the Germans' wartime technological advancements. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff officially established Operation Overcast on July 20th, 1945, with the dual aim of leveraging German expertise to assist in their ongoing war efforts against Japan and to bolster U.S. post-war military research. The operation was conducted by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, aka JIOA, which was largely carried out by the special agents of the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. Scientists taken were often involved in the Nazi rocket program, aviation, and chemical and biological warfare, which again, kind of skirting over what you were kind of already explaining a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
The operation was characterized by the recruitment of German specialists along with their families, bringing the total to more than 6,000 relocated to the U.S. for their expertise, valued at U.S. $10 billion in patents and industrial processes. And also keep in mind that their families were brought over. And when it comes to a lot of this research that goes past the bloodline or it extends, you're going to end up carrying it on with your kids. So even if the kids weren't Nazis, they're going to grow up in this house where these people had these Nazi experimentation ideologies and assumably pushed them on to their next generation. And that's a continuous chain that goes down into today. These recruits involved notable figures such as Werner von Braun, a leading scientist in rocket technology, and were instrumental in the development of the U.S. space program and military technology during the Cold War. Despite its contribution to American scientific advancement, Operation Paperclip has been controversial due to the Nazi affiliations of many recruits and the ethical implications of assimilating individuals associated with war crimes into American society. And
just jumping in there, this isn't just like integrating people into American society. It's not like they gave them a job at Walmart. You know, these were people that were running the country for all intents and purposes, you know?
And have seen some fucked up shit as far as the experiments that they've done. And again, their families, who knows which side they were on? They could have been the one that completely separated their family from their work. Or on the other side, if they knew that this was work that was going to continue on past their lifetime, the kid could have seen and been involved in this since the beginning and have seen just as messed up stuff as the parents did.
Yeah.
So these kids could have been coming into the country with that full ideology of fuck the U.S. I'm just trying to continue my family's experimentation. So this is where I start getting into the UFO stuff. So obviously there was the War of the Worlds, the whole broadcast that happened in 1938. And everybody saw how much fear that instilled in everybody. Like, everybody thought it was actually happening. Everybody freaked out. And then after they told everybody it was false, everybody was kind of like, oh, well, okay. And then that started kind of leaving that UFO phenomenon in the back of people's heads. And jumping back into the timeline that I was trying to mention here. So obviously the war, they used them to try to fight against Japanese, which started happening around 1945, I believe was the time that it said. Yeah, 1945. So in 1945, Murray Leinster's 1945 novelette First Contact is the best known scientific fiction, which is specifically devoted to first contact. So also kind of weird that book is what kind of started bringing the UFO phenomenon into the minds of the average Americans. And through the 1950s, stories involving first contact were common in the United States and typically involved conflict. Professor of communication Victoria O'Donnell writes that these films presented indirect expressions of anxiety about the possibility of a nuclear holocaust or a communist invasion of America. These fears were expressed in various guises, such as aliens using mind control, monstrous mutants unleashed by radioactive fallout, radiation's terrible effects on human life, and scientists obsessed with dangerous experiments. Again, kind of almost trying to put all of that stuff in the scientific minds, or in the fictional mindset
Consciousness.
rather than in the conscious happening in front of you mindset. Like they try to make it seem like it was just something that was in books, even though this was something that was happening around this time that they were almost trying to hide within fiction. Most films of this kind have an optimistic ending. She reviewed 4 major topics in these films: extraterrestrial travel, alien invasion and infiltration, mutant metamorphosis, and resurrection of extinct species, and near annihilation or the end of the earth. So again, that's when this all started getting brought into the American mindset. So now the American mindset has this UFO abduction idea in their heads. They see it as something that's in books and in movies. So it's like, it's in their minds, but they see it as something more fictional, which is, again, I think an intentional ploy that fell right after Operation Paperclip.
And I know we're going to get probably deeper into the Betty and Barney Hill abduction here in a minute, but, I've heard from multiple sources, read from multiple things, that prior to the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, that was like the first time when this idea of the Greys was really popularized. Before that, aliens and, pilots of extraterrestrial craft or whatever were seen as space men. Like they had much more human-like.
And they had suits and stuff. Like I have this comic book up here that they're more so look like men in suits than they do aliens as we know them today. And this is a comic book from 1952.
Yeah, they weren't aliens. They were space men. And we talk about a lot. I think we talked about it extensively in our Integratron episode, but something we've touched on, this idea of like the benevolent space brothers coming down and warning humanity against, the dangers of nuclear warfare and everybody love everybody and take care of your planet and that kind of stuff. And that's basically what they were saying these films were trying to, convince people of. So it's kind of funny to me that all this stuff was kind of going on at the same time.
Which I definitely, again, think that there's 2 sides of the phenomenon. I don't think that all of the phenomenon is human-based. I think it's double-sided here.
Yeah.
I think that there was a lot of phenomenon that was happening trying to conduct these experiments. And on the other side, I do think that there is extraterrestrial intervention when there's things such as nuclear weapons that are going to get activated. Like, when they just come and shut that shit off, I mean, it could definitely be a military thing coming from the other side. But if it seems like the U.S. is primarily focused on this, why would the U.S. be shutting off their own nuclear warheads? It seems like there still is another factor here. It could be another country doing this shit, or it could be the actual extraterrestrials saying, all right, you're done with this, because if you blow this up, you're splitting atoms and it's going to affect not just your reality, but other realities.
Well, and I think this is something I've probably gone on record on the show saying, like, I totally believe that there's some sort of extraterrestrial presence out there. I think that extraterrestrial presence has visited Earth throughout history. But I think those visits are few and far between. I think they could be hundreds or thousands of years, on our time scale between those visits. I think, it's very possible that they came in ancient times. And
I think it's as needed humanity. Too. Like when stuff is needed, then they make their appearance, but they're not just making their appearance regularly. It's all right. They fucked up enough. We got to put them on the right path.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off of that, I think, yes, there are cases of true to foil extraterrestrials coming down to Earth and interacting with people. But I think a lot of the modern day UFO phenomenon can be chalked up to misidentification of natural resources, or not natural resource, but natural occurrences rather. And the big thing is government testing, whether that be just UFO sightings where they're testing aircraft, or this kind of eugenics stuff where we're going to get deeper into it. But I think that's probably a large percentage of today's modern UFO encounters and sightings and abductions and all of that.
And I'll even make some more kind of weird links as we get a little bit farther in. We're about to get into the cases, but for anybody that isn't familiar with Project MK Ultra, give you a little bit of a background on it.
And this could be a whole episode. I mean, this is going to be just scratching the surface.
Like I put it into one paragraph, and like I said, a lot of these portions I'm talking about in this can definitely be full episodes. I just kind of came into this idea that, assuming that most people who listen to the show have probably at least heard these concepts, and if not, I could leave them kind of vague, but we can definitely cover back around to them. I think Project MK Ultra is definitely one of those things we could circle back to, but just to throw a brief description of it, Project MK Ultra was an illegal human experiments program developed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, aka the CIA. To develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. It began in 1953, again, remember that time era, and was halted in 1973, supposedly. But remember, again, 1973 here. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain function, such as to convert administrations of high doses of psychological drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals without the subject's consent.
Well, and the whole, it was halted in 1973. When we talk about like Project Blue Book and all that kind of stuff, and how basically the exact same program had like 4 different names, like anyone who thinks they're not doing this shit now is just kidding themselves,
As soon as somebody figures out the name of an operation and can start looking into it, then they scrap it and bring it up under a new name.
Yeah.
Because if they're getting results, they're not going to stop a program just because people know about it. But you can't conduct this program without people's consent if they are aware that it's a possibility, because then already there's not a constant at that point.
Well, and even today with like Freedom of Information Act requests and stuff like that, you have to like know what you're requesting. So if they just constantly change the names of this stuff, they can largely stay a step ahead of people. And, it's decades by the time they declassify a lot of this stuff. And at that point, most people are like, who the hell cares,
And I got to throw this in. Most people think of Project MK Ultra and Operation Paperclip as conspiracy theories, and that is purposefully placed because both of those programs are proven and have documentation that they were happening and existing. They are not a conspiracy theory, even though everybody wants to put in the public mind that those are conspiracy theories and there's no proof behind them. There is pages and pages and pages of documented proof behind both of those. And moving into the more modern alien abductions now, because again, these experiments were happening from 1953 to 1973. And what happened right in the middle of that? Betty and Barney Hill. Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who claimed that they were abducted by extraterrestrials in a rural portion of the state of New Hampshire on September 19th to the 20th, 1961.
So just throwing something in here, and you have gone over this more recently than I have. Isn't the area of New Hampshire where they were abducted, isn't it like the White Mountains or White Mountain or something like that?
Yep.
So the Travis Walton abduction, the place he was at was also called White Mountain or the White Mountains, or it's the exact same name.
Like, again, it makes you kind of wonder about these secret military bases and where their actual locations might be.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Barney, this is the last I get into it, and we can again do Barney and Barney Hill as a full episode if people wanted, but Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. And what does that sound like?
The Nazis.
Exactly. But everybody else comes up and goes,
aliens. Here's an idea, aliens.
Why not both?
Why not both? And I mean, getting into that, the Pascagoula abduction was an alleged UFO.
We do have a whole episode on.
Which we do have a full episode on. Which allegedly happened. The Pascagoula abduction was an alleged UFO sighting and alien abduction that happened in 1973. Which again, these experiments were halted in 1973. And
allegedly.
And the other weird part about
this far into the episode without an allegedly.
Dude, and this is a super conspiratorial one too, so I'm surprised that we haven't dropped it. And of course, I know I've made a reference to this a million times. I can't remember his name offhand. The main guy who was on the operating table during the Pascagoula abduction. Do you remember his name offhand?
Not off the top of my head.
But he made reference to the female type 1 that looked like it was wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you put somebody under some type of psychedelic, some form of LSD, some off-hatch of LSD, and you wear an alien mask. How hard would it be to convince them that you were an alien?
Well, and not only that, this was a long time ago. You know, you could probably get by with some fucking Scooby-Doo ass mask, you know, if you're just doping people up and abducting them while they're fishing. And this was 60 years ago. It wouldn't take as much to fool people back then, I think, as it would now.
We have to take a quick second to give a shout out to all of the fantastic sponsors of the show. So without further ado, Orin, why don't you let them know a little bit about some of our sponsor friends?
Big shout out to our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch. Check them out for all your squatchy gear needs. Joe at Crypto Theology. He's always killing it with your wearable whipped favorites.
I missed that.
Mr. Jones, take it away.
And Snarly Yow for a fantastic natural line of beard oil, beard balm, beard shampoo, and body wash, all with an enticing woodsy aroma of smoky cedar with a hint of mint. But that's not the only thing the Snarly Yow does. Orin, what else does he do?
He also puts on enticing events in the West Virginia area. Our buddy Dave, a.k.a. the Snarly Yow, nicest guy ever. So if you're in the area, check out one of his events. We will be speaking and emceeing at Cryptid Halloween 3 this October.
And we'll, of course, give you guys more information on that as we get closer. And our newest sponsor of the show, I got to give a big shout out to him. And he will also be a guest on the show, I believe, within the next couple weeks. So you guys can hear a little bit about him and his own weird personal stories he's had on his property. But Big Ape Threads, don't forget to go and check that out for all of their Bigfoot and cryptid related designs. And moving into the affiliate links, you guys can go and check out Oregon-ite, which specializes in scale model pyramid replicas, EMF protection devices, and much more. And if you guys use code OMM at checkout, you guys can receive 10% off.
And a big shout out to our buddy Barry with Dimension Devices. Check out our episode we did with him a couple months ago if you guys haven't. But he makes this super cool ghost hunting device called the Chattergeist. He was nice enough to share one with me and Shane. Super cool device. He's a super cool guy. All the maintenance and updates and whatnot he does himself. So definitely check that out.
And if you guys want to get a Chattergeist for yourself, you guys can use our affiliate link to receive 10% off. And it is all in pounds, but it does convert over through PayPal. So just because you're not in the UK, don't think that you can't scoop one for yourself. And moving into the last affiliate link, if you guys are another podcast or you guys own a local business, anything like that, you might need to be able to print your logo onto stickers, envelopes, t-shirts, any of that really cool stuff, you guys can go and check out Sticker Mule. And if you guys use our affiliate link that will be down in the show description, you guys can receive a $10 credit towards anything you guys might want to pick up. I use it for all of my stuff. They have really, really good quality, so I highly recommend checking out Sticker Mule.
And now let's get back to the show.
And I mean, even going into modern day stuff, though, you have stuff like the Peruvian face peelers, right? They looked like they were wearing suits. And the one girl who was the main one that got grabbed by him, she got the big slit and everything on her neck. Tim Alberino, who's been on Blurry Creatures a bunch of times, he talks about how he actually went there and got to actually talk to all these people. And he mentioned that the girl who had been picked up, she didn't want to originally talk and stuff. But when he got her talking, she said that she heard both of them, one of them speaking decent Peruvian Spanish, because I know they have their own twist on it, and then the other one sounded like a white guy trying to speak it. So now I think that the whole phenomenon is transitioning into the whole suit aspect because it's a better way to kind of cover it up. And leading into the suit aspect, you have things like the Flatwoods Monster, which could also potentially play a piece in all of this. And the transition where you don't just have the idea of aliens, but also of these robots or alien robot looking things that seem to work with the aliens or are separate from the aliens, but they all are viewed as extraterrestrials.
And there's a certain detail of Flatwoods that ties right into this. Do you remember how they talked about this mist that got sprayed on the eyewitnesses and they all got really sick afterwards and they experienced eye burn and the normal UFO abduction type shit. And then Eugene Lemon's dog died from it. So maybe this was some sort of biological warfare because they specifically, in my research, they specifically noted that all these symptoms were very similar to exposure to mustard gas.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because I'm actually going to do an episode on this at some point. But there was also another case that still kind of gets viewed as possibly within the missing 411 realm. But it was essentially this hunter who went out. He was a bow hunter, went out with his friends, and he got separated from the group. They all went night hunting and stuff like that. And this guy basically ended up in a tree while watching two biological aliens, as he claimed, walking around down on the ground. And then he said that they were like inspecting, looking at things. So he ended up getting up in the tree. He tied a belt around his waist so he was able to hold himself up there and he wouldn't accidentally fall off. And then a robot came and kept breathing out this mist that kept knocking him out. And every time he'd knock out, he'd kick back up and wake himself up. And then he was trying to keep these things away. So he did things like he was shooting his bow at them. He was taking coins out of his pocket and throwing coins at them. He was taking his matchbook and throwing flames at them. So, like, there's also the connection here with there was a robot, one, and two, it had this weird mist that came out of its mouth that was knocking this guy out when he was up in the tree. Like, they were trying to knock him out, and he was actually able to fight it off and would get knocked out and wake back up before they were able to get back up to him. So there's another tie to it. I just got to figure out that guy's name, but I was planning on doing an episode about it.
No, that's a good one. I'm not familiar with that account.
So that would be a perfect one. And maybe I can do that as my next piece that I end up putting together to be able to tag off the back end of this one.
Yeah, for sure.
So at this point now, we have we'll explain more of the reasons why, but you have the Nazi experiments, which sound a lot like UFO abduction experiments. You have the means of them having possible flying/zero gravity devices. And the other question that comes in is this whole idea that they're able to communicate with through people's mind, right? So there's still another connection to that. And I couldn't find the original patent, but I did find another patent, and we'll get back into that. But talking about this device called the Voice of God, aka the long-range acoustic device, which directs intense sound in a narrow cone. The sound is so clear and so powerful that it is again nicknamed the Voice of God. And one person that worked for the government made reference of actually seeing this thing work, and he said, at a government workshop some time ago, I heard someone describe a new tool that was described as the Voice of Allah. This was said to be the device that would operate at a distance and would deliver a message that only a single person could hear. The story was that it was tested in a conflict situation in Iraq and pointed at one insurgent in a group who whipped around looking in all directions and began a heated conversation with his compatriots who did not hear the message. At this time, I greeted his story with some skepticism. And if you look back into it, I've heard a bunch of people talking about how there were supposedly patents for this Voice of God back in the 1930s or 40s, something like that. It was around the same time that the Philadelphia experiment was happening. But on the other side, though, I did find a patent for something they call the neuroelectromagnetic weapon effect. And it's like, I got a little like, it basically describes how it works on the body. It basically is describing the same things that it uses this narrow cone of frequency in order to basically just put a voice in somebody's head. But this patent was from 1974. But here's the thing about secret programs like this. If you're working on a secret device like this and nobody knows about it, you're not going to put a patent on it until it's already been created. Because as soon as you put a patent on it, people are going to start looking into patents, and now people are going to be aware of the devices that you have. So if you're working on shit like this, you're not going to put a patent on it or make it obvious to the public that it might exist until you have the technology worked out. So if this happened in 1974, which again still kind of falls within that weird time range that they would have had testing, these original early UFO abductions could have been the tests for this, and then they actually put the patent on it in 1974, right after these cases were happening. So then again, you have the connection of how they're able to speak to people in their minds. Even if they're in a bedroom, people are still able to hear the extraterrestrials talking to them and stuff, which perfectly fits the idea behind this weapon.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
And getting into like the reasons why, this is kind of the end of everything. Genetic testing, of course, which goes into a lot of the what they were trying to do for like eugenics and everything, trying to isolate specific genetics, trying to get rid of bad genetics or bad races of people as they would see it, and keep working on the positive ones that they want to work. And they could also potentially be testing for cures, which could be why people have a lot of these experiences where the extraterrestrials are, quote, healing weird defects in their body. It may not be like, we're aliens, we're here to help you. It's more like, we're testing this device and we're going to see if it works. And if it works, it works. These people are happy. They got a new good experience with aliens. But if it doesn't work and they have a bad experience, it's just an abduction experience. Somebody's going to believe them anyways. So they're able to test for cures with this thing. And when you get into the whole genetics testing idea, then you start getting into these family lines on how certain genetic defects or good genetics will run in a family line, which gets into the whole UFO abduction thing that it seems to continuously run in family lines. And when you get into the whole idea behind them working on a, quote, superior race, or they're working on hybrid beings, or all of this kind of stuff, that's when you get into the cattle mutilation. Because I know that L.A. Marzulli was talking about this. I made reference to this on the show a couple of years ago. This whole idea that you could interchangeably use a cow's womb for a human baby. And you can also use cow blood as for transplants for humans if it's the same blood type, because it's a blood that will work both ways. So if you were trying to create hybrid beings, depending on what the size is, of course, it's going to destroy the female coming out. That was what I said with the whole extraterrestrial concept before. But on the other side of it too, you know, you're not going to want proof of this experimentation that you're doing. So you're going to take the baby out before it's officially ready. And you're going to still need to have somewhere to put the baby so they can finish developing. So then you create these artificial wombs, which you'd be making with cow wombs and the cow blood, and you just take the other random pieces just to throw people off, essentially. Because if you're just taking the womb, people would probably start putting pieces together. But you take an eye, you take a tongue, but you always take the womb and you take the blood. That's the part you actually need.
Well, and that's a hallmark of all these like abduction situations where like a woman is abducted and she's impregnated and like is obviously pregnant, and then at some point during the pregnancy is abducted again and the baby is taken. So, I mean, that makes perfect sense when you really think about it.
Mm-hmm. And again, getting into the whole idea behind like the Nordics and stuff. The Nordics have a weird similar idea with what the Nazis wanted to create, which was blonde-haired, blue-eyed beings. And where does everybody have theories now that these people supposedly existed? And they say underneath the ice sheets and everything in the Arctic and everything. Maybe the Nordics don't go back as far as we think they do. Maybe this is where they were putting the races of beings that they were creating. And a lot of these babies that are disappearing that were from UFO abduction cases are actually what we're calling the Nordics. And they have a society where these things are potentially living. Well, I don't want to say things, they'd be humans, but we're viewing them as a different race because maybe they have different genetics than us because they've had added non-human genetics to them. But
well, and something that popped into my head while you were just kind of talking about all that, in Paul Staub's book, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, that I'm currently reading, we talked about it at least a couple weeks ago on the episode, but he talks about, this idea that the Nephilim came down, or the angels came down and mated with human women to create the Nephilim. And I think this is like from the Book of Enoch or extra biblical sources or whatever. But basically the idea that he brought up is that these women had to undergo some sort of conversion process to birth these Nephilim. And basically it was spun as they were turned into sirens or some sort of hybrid type being. But again, issues of language, kind of all talking about the same thing here, you know?
And I mean, this could definitely be human-based, but also it could not be. Because if you get into the whole biblical idea of what these other races or beings are, you know, this aspect of it could be human, but it could be done for a higher source that may not be human, you know? Like whether you want to view that biblically or extraterrestrial.
Like we talked about.
Or if they're time travelers.
Yeah, the rabbit holes just go deeper and deeper on this one.
And to throw in just a couple of closing ideas. The whole idea that you hear about this all the time with UFO phenomenon, that people get abducted multiple nights in a row, right? How many times have you heard about them seeing different races of beings the multiple nights in a row?
Yeah, that's true.
So if extraterrestrials are, again, still part of the phenomenon, and they're taking people to do whatever they're trying to do, who's to say the humans aren't like, all right, what do they do to that person? And then they come the following night, and they abduct them to try to figure out what the aliens were actually doing the night before, or to figure out why the aliens have an interest in that person.
Or if actual aliens came and abducted these people, you know, it's like we talk about with UFO sightings, like the first one might be a legitimate extraterrestrial something. And then after that, the government's like, okay, we can just test our shit now. No one's going to think it's government. It could be the same thing.
Exactly. And then this is the last piece that's kind of the closure for all of this. It is also extremely weird. The UFO phenomenon now, or UAP phenomenon, what is not mentioned in any of this?
Well, we very rarely hear about actual beings anymore, it seems like.
Well, I was going to say abductions.
Yeah.
They are always talking about
goes hand in hand.
UAPs and UFOs, but there is no reference to modern abductions as they talk about the phenomenon. Like they're purposely completely leaving that out, like it's not a component to the phenomenon, even though they are trying to research it now, which seems kind of weird because that would be one of the main things that you'd be wanting to try to figure out if you're seeing these things. If they're supposedly taking people, why? Why do they leave it out of the phenomenon? Because there's a good chance that they already know what's going on, or two, they're actually the ones doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's my closer on it, man. I don't know if you have different ideas or anything you want to throw into it on this one. I feel like I could dive into this a lot farther. And as I kept going, I kept kind of traveling down weird rabbit holes, but I kind of feel like this is a pretty good, well-rounded idea to explain why I believe what I believe with backing to it through years that perfectly line up with each other.
No, I mean, this was really cool. I think it touches on a lot of different aspects. And, you know, we always talk about what are the connections between things. And this gives a lot of connective tissue. I will tell one quick story if we got time. It's something I've told on the show before, but I think it really ties into this topic. So when we did our Jack Parsons series, when we were talking about the Collins Elite, which is, you know, this government group who were under the impression that aliens were like literal demons, like biblical hell demons. They talk about in the book I read by Nick Redfern about all this, basically these same ideas that the government is perpetrating a lot of experimentation and a lot of the abductions could be due to the government. And this one story that he highlighted was this woman who like repeatedly got abducted, and her abductions always started the same way. She would be like sitting in her living room and like she'd hear this like buzzing sound, and then basically she'd be rendered motionless, and these extraterrestrials would come in and abduct her, and they'd do their thing, and they'd bring her back and sit her, on the couch wherever they found her, and then they'd be gone. Well, it was like the fifth time she got abducted, and this like buzzing sound started, the lights flickered. Same thing that always started with these abductions. But so the aliens come in like normal, but in the middle of all this, like the buzzing sound stopped. And she said like the facade, evaporated away, and these extraterrestrial beings turned into like humans in like black army fatigues. And once they figured out that whatever had gone wrong, they ran out of the house and into a black helicopter and flew away.
Well, I mean, just to connect a few more pieces here, that I'm glad that you brought this up because it kind of connected a few other things for me. So everybody knows about the whole beat things where you play like two different frequencies in your ear and it causes like hallucinations and things too. If they've been experimenting on hallucinogenic drugs since fucking 1930 something possibly, who's to say that they haven't developed these projected energy weapons, which again also leads in with the idea of the voice of God, that they could basically cause people to have psychedelic effects just through vibration and frequency without actually having to physically inject somebody or give somebody any type of psychedelic drug, even if it's for a short period, so just that they can get them into captivity, and then after that, then they give them the drugs they were going to give them. I mean, it's definitely within the realm of possibility that part of the frequency, the hum people hear, all of that could actually be part of something that's giving you hallucinogenic effects. Yeah.
It's putting you basically in the mind state to go somewhere else mentally. And we talk about all the time, like this mental consciousness aspect of the whole UFO phenomenon. This all ties right into it as far as I'm concerned.
And the other aspect that I want to bring in I'm glad that you brought this up towards the end because I thought about this. A lot of people talk about this idea that when they're getting abducted, that they'll pray to God or they'll call for Jesus and the extraterrestrials will stop. That could be potentially because they are humans. Because keep in mind, the Nazis had Christian ideology and they used to try to steal religious artifacts, which means that they had a base in Christianity regardless. So if these people are doing things and they're rationalizing in their mind that it's for the good of the human race and it's not actually cruel experiments on people, but rather that they're trying to help the humans as they see it, then if you start calling out to God in front of them, they're like, oh, fuck, like we can't do this one. We just got to back up because it starts going against their own ideology that if somebody's praying to God, they feel like it's going against their ideology. You know what I mean? Like they have to have somebody that doesn't believe in God, because even if they don't believe in God, it might be somebody that they see as lesser if they have such hard religious beliefs. And again, they had hard religious beliefs, because why else have they been trying to steal all of these religious artifacts, like, the Ark of the Covenant, for example.
Well, and that kind of
Or the
ties
spear.
back to the whole, that
Spear of
kinda
Destiny.
ties back
That
to
it?
the whole Collins Elite idea as well. Like, whether these things are extraterrestrials or quote unquote demons isn't as important as these people think that's what they are, and what the people in power think is just as important as what's right and wrong and what's true and false.
And I mean, talk about sprinkling breadcrumbs too. The whole idea of the Collins Elite could be intentionally placed to begin with, so that people are associating it with, again, things that are in the unseeable realm and in the non-physical realm, so that, again, it just takes away more attention from the possibility of it actually being them.
Yeah, and not, the guys at the military base that's underground, 20 miles outside your town.
Or inside that mountain that everybody seems to get abducted near.
There you go. The White Mountains.
Exactly.
So kind of wrapping this one up. This has been a fun one, Shane. Thanks for putting together all this research. A little bit different than our normal episodes, but I think this is a cool format to kind of touch on for certain topics. But anyway, you guys out there, contact us if you want to be a guest on our show or want us to be a guest on your show, or if you want to contribute to the show in any way. Shane, tell them how they can do that.
You guys can get a hold of us through social media, Instagram or Facebook. Instagram is the one that we are the most active on, of course. Or you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com. Or you guys can go to the link tree and you guys can fill out the submission form that says contact us. And of course, the other one is to report an encounter. So also don't forget to report those encounters to ommencounterreports@outlook.com. If you think that you potentially have been abducted for Nazi experimentation, well, not a perfect thing to report, because it would contribute into all of this. And if we get some people that have had these weird human-like abduction cases, I mean, we could definitely do a follow-up to this where we have a bunch of listeners that have told cases where they may have seen masks or seen military personnel, any of that kind of stuff. But again, we'll be able to do that, guys, unless you guys report those encounters. And guys, obviously, we get a little bit unhinged here. We get weird. We get conspiratorial. We're not afraid to be weird, man. So guys, don't forget to always, always stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
The aliens are actually Nazis?